What a week.
Yes, it was. The moon was in. Your repair won't work no matter how many times you try it.
Everyone in the shop.
Everyone in the shop had
just
problems.
terrible luck
Right.
all week. Especially, well, I don't want to single myself out as having more bad luck than anybody else.
Well, I think we shared it, you know.
Yeah.
We spent how much time trying to get that transmission to return, to shift to return, and then everything I touched just didn't work. It took 10 times as long, and, you know, Garrett had the same problems with that neutral switch, and then he hit a bike today and broke a fairing and some stuff, and we got to take it all apart now.
Yeah, moving that sidecar around.
Yeah. So everything, this was, every once in a while we have a week where the moon's in, you can't fix anything, you know. That was this week.
An emotionally devastating week.
Oh, and emotional, you just get pissed off, and, you know,
Yeah.
to the point where I threw anything around the shop. It's just, you know, I went home,
I might have thrown some stuff.
oh, that's okay. That's why you're in your little section. We can roll the roll-down door up, and you can lock you in, put you in a straitjacket, and you can scream and yell. We won't ever hear you.
You know what I did? Last Friday, I got that transmission out, and I posted about it. I was pretty proud of myself. From walking in the door to having the transmission out only took an hour. And I posted about it, kind of humble bragged about it on Goldstroke.
And found out it's a half-hour job.
I was, it's not that.
I can do it in a half hour. It's not that hard.
But everything has to go right.
Right, of course.
Yeah. And then putting it back in, everything went wrong. I mean, everything that was the drive shaft not lining up well. You know, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. And then the little black tube that goes into the airbox.
Right. Oh, yeah.
That can either be real easy
it's a pain
or
in the ass, no matter what you look at. Yeah.
That's what made me.
You know,
things,
we used to have the little contests. How quickly could we roll a Volkswagen up on the lift and have the motor out? Because once you disconnected the fuel line and the throttle cable, there were only 4 bolts that held it in, and so we had a special jack, so you could put it up underneath there, stick it up on the lift, take it out, put it on the floor, and then put it back in again, get it all bolted up, and see how quickly you could do it. That's on days when we were really bored. There was too much snow outside, we couldn't do anything. So,
man, you guys must have been the best employees ever.
Well,
it's really bored. We're really bored. Let's see how hard we can work.
Well, you know, I lived there. Like I said,
Yeah.
you know, I lived there with Rocky the raccoon, so I was there, you know, 24/7. So my friends would come over, and you know, eventually get to that point where we couldn't do anything, and so we'd go find something to do.
Now,
Take the motor out, put it in, take it out.
the life before the internet.
We got questions?
Yeah, I think, well, we were just talking about taking out transmissions, and it reminded me of one question that we got, so we can, before we even get into questions, we can...
Before we get into questions, we can answer a question?
I think I just remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
And it's a weird one.
Who's it come from?
I don't know.
Okay.
Because it's something I've never done, because it's not something... Can you lube the input splines of a transmission without taking it out of the frame?
Sure. I mean, a lot of people do that. They take the swing arm out, they pull the gearbox back
Yeah, and then you
far
would just...
enough, and then they take a long screwdriver, put it in, stick it back in again, and they're done, they think.
You would never...
You could do that.
Or you wouldn't disconnect the drive shaft bolts. You just pull it back as a single unit.
Let's see.
Because if you're
Yeah, you could do that, but it takes 2 people. Because you got to pull it out straight, then it takes 2 people, somebody to push it, to hold it from the back, the rear drive and the whole thing, and push back in. But yeah, sure,
Yeah.
you can do it.
Because if you're gonna, you're already done with most of the work if you take the drive shaft.
Well, the thing is that we don't normally take transmissions out just to lube the. Usually, if we're going to go that far, we're going to do clutch. Look at the clutch and the spring. We're going to do a rear main seal and an oil pump seal, because you don't have to go back in there for another 50,000 miles. So that's part of the whole deal. But yeah,
which is why I have no idea if you could do it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. You can do it.
Usually, other things you're doing when you're in there.
You know, you can do lots of things that you shouldn't do. I can remember getting ready to go to visit my girlfriend in Panama City, sitting in the bathtub at 12 o'clock, getting ready to get on my bike and leave, and realizing that I had pushrod tube seals that were leaking, that I really wanted to fix them, but I didn't want to pull a cylinder off, which is, of course, you got to pull the cylinder off because all the oil gets between them. So I managed to, no, it was the head gasket I was replaced, so I managed to take the head off, put it and put it all back together, and never took the cylinder loose, and didn't leak any worse than it did before. Well, I would never do that on a customer's bike, but I I did the whole thing in 45 minutes, and then I was gone by 4 o'clock in the morning and headed on down the road. But there's lots of things you can do on your own bike that you would never do on a customer's bike, just
because it leaves, and if it doesn't take.
Well, it's just like drive shaft bolts. They tell you to replace them all. I mean, you can barely torque them. I've used the same bolts in my bike for probably 10 years.
Yeah.
I clean them off, put some red Loctite on them, and I got a 12-inch, 12-point wrench that I use that I can snug it down real hard. But how much can you torque it? Eventually, the transmission, spring-loaded part of the transmission moves, and so BMW tells you to do that. Flywheel bolts, I don't use over. Though Murray and I have had this discussion, and they're probably usable. They do stretch, but they torque to like 78 pounds or something.
Okay.
So probably something you shouldn't do, but I mean you should replace. But
how do you feel about, and this is all off the right, because we don't do this on customers' bikes. Clutch bolts.
Always replace them.
Okay.
I'm never going to the bolts and the washers, depending on what it is. I'm never going to get. I mean, you're saving what, $6 or $8? So It doesn't make any sense. It does to me if I'm working on my own bike, because I know that you don't need to do it, but I'm not going to not do it and then have to take the whole bike apart because the one time I said it doesn't matter, it does. So just I'm not going to do it. I always do what you're supposed to do, but on my own bike I don't.
Well, that's good.
I think everybody does that.
Yeah.
So
no, there's a lot of. I think when you know what you're doing too, it's easier to kind of break the rules.
Sure, because you understand why they told you to do it, and then you decide if it's bullshit or not.
Yeah.
A lot of things we read about, Murray goes, I'm calling bullshit on that. And then he goes into a diatribe for mechanical, this, that, and the other, about why it's not correct.
And then there's a lot of extra stuff sometimes people do.
Oh, there's tons of it, and I say the things to people in the shop here all the time about doing stuff. Oh, it's easier. Yeah, it's easier, but it takes a lot longer if you figure out how to do it. If you work at flat rate, if you work for a dealer and they gave you 2 hours to do something, you'll figure out how to do it in an hour and 45 minutes as opposed to doing it in 3 hours. Sure, you can do it, but why do you have to take all the stuff off when you don't really need to do it?
Well, one thing I was thinking about specifically
is battery box?
No, I was a bike I was working on this week. Transmission bolts were like, it didn't look like Loctite. It looked like wood glue. To be honest, maybe
you mean holding it into the motor?
Holding it into the motor, just completely, and
maybe that somebody decided that's all they had, so they used it.
Yeah, they didn't need to.
You know what redneck Loctite is?
What?
You know what redneck Loctite is?
What is redneck Loctite?
Cross threading a bolt. I learned that in high school. First day in auto shop.
What's your Harley joke?
Oh, well, when I worked at Freeman Cycle Sales in Beverly, Mass., we had a Harley dealer down the street, and I came in one Friday evening. I was adjusting my valves, and I was torquing my heads, adjusting my valves, and I came in the door, and they went, "Oh, we're getting really fancy now, huh? Torquing the heads." And I go, "Well, it's not like the Harley. You torque it till it breaks, and then you back it off a half a turn." And they just kind of looked at us like, "Oh."
No, that's a good one.
So,
what really worried me about that is the through bolt was also glued. I'm not going to call it Loctite. I don't know what it was. Which you probably shouldn't do that. Yeah.
It's got a lock washer on it, or put a nylock nut on it. It usually doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think
the rest of them have lock washers on it. I don't Loctite any of that stuff. I never have them go loose. I've never had them come loose unless they weren't tightened to begin with.
Yeah, which happens.
This bike here that I just took apart, it was leaking all over the place. Two of the bolts holding the oil pump cover on were loose. So it was, not only was it leaking, but it was probably losing some oil pressure. But I started the motor before I took the bike apart. Sounds great. The rest of the bike was a disaster.
Yeah.
So on to our questions.
All right. You can choose any AIRhead to ride anywhere in the world. Which one, where, and why?
we've touched on this before. I mean, I ride, my bike that I ride now is what I choose to ride. And it's my modified 81 R80 GS, and I have it set up so it does the road pretty well and it does off-road pretty well.
You're a pretty content man.
Well, if I was only, I had I've still got my 88 RT. It's got a Russell Daylong seat on it and Olin shock. It's got the police package, two little levers. One's a driving light, and one's a fog light, and it's well set up for two people, and it's a great road bike. So if I was not going to go off road, then I would probably ride my RT because it's fully fared and it's comfortable and I can stash a lot of stuff in it, and But if you're asking me what I would ride because I like to ride dirt roads, then I'm going to ride something that I could ride on the highway at 65 miles an hour all day long because that's all I need to go. And then when I see a dirt road, I can go take it. So I had a guy sent me a note the other day from Alaska, asked me the same question.
I saw that.
Yeah, and so I said, if it were me, I'd just buy an ST, put some knobbies on it, and go ride it.
He was asking about the sweet spot with AIRheads because parts are harder to get in Alaska. I'm sure shipping is terrible.
I said, what kind of riding are you going to do? He said, I'm in Alaska. I'm going to do some adventure riding. I said, well, just buy an ST and put some knobbies on it and be done with it. That's pretty straightforward. It's a great bike.
I was thinking about the monoshock eras.
Well,
but I
the ST is a monoshock.
Yeah, well, no, you know what I mean.
Yeah, the 85 to 95.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking off-road. But those are kind of
that's what he said. And I wrote him a note back, and he said, well, I'm in Alaska, so I'm going to want to ride some dirt and gravel roads. And I said, well,
if you like the look of those bikes, I mean, the wiring harness is laid out perfectly. The brakes are better. They kind of got everything worked out, and then they stopped making their heads, which is, how it goes. But
right, well,
those bikes are great. Tubeless,
Tubeless tires, yeah. That started
tires,
on all of them in 85.
Yeah, 85 to...
Well, 95, but they quit making them in 94, and they were just leftovers in 95.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. That's pretty much... taking my R75/6 a few thousand miles across country, what spare bits would you bring?
Okay, well, needless to say,
tubes.
You need two different size tubes, a small compressor, a bead breaker, and tire irons to begin with. I would also carry, if you got the room and you still have points, then, points and condenser, spare plug, I would carry a voltage regulator, a diode board, and a rotor for sure. Voltage regulator you can buy at auto parts store. And of course spare fuses.
Why a rotor?
Because the rotor is the only part of the electrical system that moves, and because it's windings, centrifugal force eventually throws the windings, pushes the windings out, and they start to move, and then when they start to massage each other, the coating comes off, and once they ground out, then it doesn't work anymore. You've got two slip rings, you need continuity between those two slip rings, and once something gets interfered in there, then they don't work, and that's why the permanent magnet charging systems, which has just a big magnet in the middle and a regulator rectifier, is a nice replacement, because what spins doesn't have anything to come apart. So the weakest part of that bike is the charging system.
What about brushes? How long do brushes last?
I would look at my brushes before I left, but that's they're really tiny, replace them, but in general, those things last a long time. And I take a spare throttle cable and a spare clutch cable. Brake cables, brakes, those things last forever.
Yeah, fuses
fuses I carry, but I carry spare wire. Carry a test light. I carry a small voltometer.
So you
carry duct tape.
Mostly worried about electronics and tires.
Electronics and tires, yeah. I carry some epoxy, carry some duct tape, of course.
And then we should also bring up elevation. We don't know where he's going.
Well, yeah, if you get above 8,000 feet, you'll have to go down sizes on your jets, so that's true. In which case you'll need to carry a thin 10 millimeter wrench that you have to modify, and then an 8 millimeter socket or wrench so you can swap out the main jets, and then put them in a little plastic bag and label them. Of course, it doesn't hurt to carry a spare float gaskets, because if you take the float off, it's easy to tear a float gasket.
It is.
And especially if you have to take it on and off in order to rejet the carburetor. So, I would carry a float gasket. You'd have to put it in between two pieces of chert cardboard or something of that nature. Like I say, I'd carry some wire with me to make jumpers if I needed to.
Yeah.
I carry miscellaneous nuts and bolts. I carry way more stuff than I need. That way I figure out I probably won't ever need it. It's like taking my raincoat when the sun's out. So yeah, tire changing stuff, charging system stuff, ignition on that bike, points and condenser, spare spark plug. It's not a bad idea. Well, you probably don't need spark plug ends. I have broken one on my bike when I have my GS is dual plugged, and riding out in the woods, I broke one. But even then, you can get around that. But it's not a bad idea to carry one. You could carry a ton of stuff, but given the constraints of space, tire change stuff, charging system stuff, ignition, a couple of ignition pieces, the condenser and the points. If you really, you can call us, we can help you put something together. I've done that. I did that with Newt, who's going to Patagonia. We went over a lot of that stuff, what he would need, and a little container of oil to get him when he's out somewhere and checks it and he's a little low. Fill up on the oil and so on and so forth. So when I go out west, I always carry a can of fuel conditioner, a can of dry gas with me. A lot of times when you're out in the middle of nowhere and the only gas is a mom and pop, not only are they on the end of the line getting the shitty gas, but it sits a long time.
Are you talking about like seafoam?
Seafoam, yeah.
Okay.
Something that will allow the water to mix with the fuel. Last time I went out, the very first day in Colorado, I stopped at a mom and pop and got gas, and within 10 miles the bike started running poorly. I knew what the problem was. And you don't necessarily see it in your float bowl. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, sometimes it's mixed up. But I just went over to AutoZone, bought some dry gas, and then from that point I carried it with me all the time. I also sometimes, when I go out west, carry octane booster, because a lot of times I get bad gas. Now, from an octane reading, on the other hand, when I built my bike, I put low compression pistons in it, and it's dual plugged, so it's a much more efficient system. So I can run just plain regular. My friend Larry was out there with his KZ1000 police bike. He didn't. His bike wouldn't run real well regular. He needs high test for that bike. That's the way it's set up. So all the world touring bikes we build for people with low compression motors.
Okay.
So that if you run PMX or shitty gas, it's not an issue. You don't have to run high test. And if you want to carry a can of octane booster with you, it's good for 3 or 4 fill-ups on a 6-gallon tank. It's usually good for at least 20 gallons. So you put a third of it in each time you do it. It lasts a while. So, if you're going to really be out on the road for a long period of time, then there's a lot of things to think about. If you're going out for just a week or two, that's different. But I carry the same stuff all the time anyway. I carry that stuff when I go into the woods. It's with me all the time. I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
Little flashlight and little sterno things. Like a while back we got stuck in the water, and it was September or October, and we were soaked. It took us 3 hours to get the bike out of the water, and then we had to ride home. We were 120 miles from the house, and fortunately I had a rain suit, which I gave to Leslie at the time, and she wore it, and I was okay. But had we got stuck there much longer, we had no cell service. We were in the middle of nowhere. We would end up spending the night there. In which case, then I started carrying a couple of space blankets and made sure I had something I could make a fire with. It just depends on what you're doing, where you're going. If you're going to be in the middle of nowhere, you have to be prepared to be in the middle of nowhere. Make sure you got water and some power bars or something with you.
I remember one time I was working on the shop on a Sunday, and you rolled in and you had a drive shaft boot that was completely duct taped
that was on
over.
that was on the Bristol Gray R69.
And because you had
I had duct tape with me, so I was able to duct tape the whole thing up and make it back to the house without
which isn't a good fix.
I was 100 miles away from
damage.
here. Yep, I was up outside of Suches.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, the more you ride, the more things happen to you, and then the more stuff you end up carrying with you, or you make sure it doesn't happen again by making that part of your regular service when you're getting ready to go somewhere.
Yeah, good answer.
I don't know, Mikey, we might be done for today.
I think we are. I mean, we've been filming for 26 minutes and
Okay.
kind of constantly. Yeah, that's a lot of good content.